Hi, I'm Bodhi Reese. Welcome to my channel. In this video, I'm going to be talking about emotional shadow work. So to understand what shadow work is, we first need to understand what the shadow is. My favourite description of what the shadow is comes from Heidi Priebe.
We all have parts of ourselves that we have hidden from ourselves. And those hidden parts do not disappear just because we start disidentifying with them. And it's important to point out that it's not just negative things that we repress about ourselves. It could be positive traits that we have in our shadow as well. So this isn't about what's good and what's bad, it's about what was useful and what was not useful for you early on in life.
That last piece is really important to understand. I think there can be an image of shadow work that portrays shadows as dark or evil or bad or negative or problematic. The whole point of shadow work is that the things that we push into our shadows are integral parts of our human experience, and the integration can bring us towards more wholeness. There are lots of different aspects of the self that could end up in the shadow. Feelings, emotions, motivations, behaviors, intentions, ideas, concepts, worldviews. In this video, I'm going to be focusing on emotions, feelings, sensations, and emotional expression. I'm going to give 3 examples of things that could be in our shadows. The reason I'm going to give these examples is so we can understand why things end up in our shadows and what might be in our shadows in order to then be able to understand why we should do shadow work and how to do shadow work. The first thing that could be in one's shadow is the feeling of anger. To understand how anger might end up in our shadow, I'm going to play you a clip from Jordan Peterson.
One thing I remember with my son, who is he's quite disagreeable by temperament, which is actually a good thing as far as I'm concerned, although it brings its own challenges. You know, what I would do with him is he would be doing something and I'd interfere and he'd get upset and, you know, angry, and so then I'd get him to sit on the steps, and I told him, and this is when he was about 2, I said, look, you're going to sit on the steps, that's time out. You're going to sit on the steps until you've got control of yourself and you can come back and play the family game again. I basically said, be a civilized human being, and then you're welcome again. And so he'd sit on the steps. It was so interesting to watch because he was just enraged. He'd sit there. Like, have you ever seen a 2-year-old have a temper tantrum? It's really quite the bloody phenomena. If you ever saw an adult do that, you'd call 911 right away. It's like, oh my God. In kids, it's like, well, first of all, they're only this long, so how much trouble can they really cause? But it's like, you know, they're just completely gone. They're like on the floor, their face is red. They're just furious, like way more furious than you ever get if you're even vaguely socialized. They're just outraged and they're kicking and hitting the ground, and like it's like a little epileptic fit of anger, you know. They're completely controlled by their rage. And so anyways, back to my son, I'd put him on the steps and he'd be like, just like enraged and trying to get himself together, you know. And I'd wait a few, I got a strict rule, which was as soon as you're done, you're welcome again. So it's completely under your control. You get yourself calmed down, you come and talk to me again. If you're calm enough so I like you, then you're welcome back in the family. No grudge, nothing. And so it's harder than you think. Like, people think they like their kids. It's like, don't be thinking that. They're hard to like. They're little monsters, and they're very, very pushy and provocative. Anyways, he'd sit on the steps and he's just enraged and trying to control himself, and I'd watch that, and then, you know, I'd come back after about 2 minutes or whatever, and he'd still be, I'd say, well, you know, have you got yourself under control? Are you ready to get off the steps? He'd go, no, not yet. And then, you know, he'd get himself under control, and then he'd come back and, you know, he'd be contrite, and then I would like him right away, you know. You got to watch that, you know, because you don't like being dominated by a 2-year-old. No one does. And so if the child hasn't mastered himself and started to act in accordance with the prevailing social norms, you won't like them. Well, you think, oh yeah, I will, because, you know, I'm a good person. It's like, no, you won't. And no, you're not a good person, so don't be thinking about that at all. It's just not true. So when he was contrite, then he'd come and then, you know, we'd just go on like nothing had happened. You could just see him gaining control over himself. And so really what was happening is in his mind, in his brain, we'll say there was a war between the psyche, the ego that was starting to become integrated, you know, and starting to become a continuous person, an identity. And it's fragile in 2-year-olds, and it can be disrupted all the time, and it is. That's why they're so hyper emotional. It's fragile, that little ego, and it doesn't have a lot of power. And so what you want to do is reward it when it wins. You know, it's when he gets control over the underlying motivations, you want to say, hey, good work, man. Good work, kid. You did it. You know, you got yourself under control. Way to be. And the kid's really happy about that because it's actually not that much fun to have a temper tantrum. It's exhausting. You know, it takes you over.
When I watch this clip, I feel quite sad for Jordan Peterson's son. This child, by Jordan Peterson's own assertion, is 2 years old. Jordan Peterson experiences the son having a temper tantrum, as he calls it, expressing anger in a way that is physically possibly dangerous or destructive in the house, in the living situation. So Jordan Peterson sends his son to sit on the steps and says, once you control yourself, you can come back into the family. 2-year-olds don't know how to regulate their emotions. We as their caregivers need to teach them that. In Jordan Peterson's defense, I think what he's trying to do in this situation is teach the child that. But forcing a child to sit by themselves in time out on the stairs when they are 2 years old and don't know how to regulate anger is really destructive, and this is how anger ends up in our shadow. From the toddler's perspective, they are now learning, if I feel angry, I lose my attachment connection, I lose my connection to my loved ones, so feeling angry is bad, dangerous, don't do that. The anger is repressed. The child might come back looking calm, and the parents congratulate them, yay, you regulated yourself. No, the toddler did not regulate themselves. They don't know how to because you haven't taught them. The child has numbed themselves. We all have the capacity for numbing. Fast forward 20 years, this adult now, 22-year-old adult, feels anger, numbing happens instantly because those neurological connections have been reinforced over and over to learn that feeling anger, bad, numb that down. This produces an adult who, anger is in their shadow, anger is not integrated, they don't understand how to regulate anger or even possibly at this point how to feel it at all. Feeling anger is really important. Anger helps us set boundaries, helps us understand what's important to us, helps us understand what fairness and justice means to us, both for ourselves and for others. Anger is quite an action-oriented energy. It can help us negotiate conflict, and actually feeling anger in conflict is helpful because it can tell us what's important to us, where our boundaries lie, and how we want to be in relation with other adults. Brene Brown says you cannot selectively numb emotion. Numb the dark and you numb the light. Which means that this child now has learned how to numb this emotion of anger. Anger's in his shadow. It's quite likely that this child is now numbing other emotions as well. From a parenting perspective, regulation and numbing can look quite similar. I super disagree with Jordan Peterson's perspective on this. I think it's really dangerous that he's presenting himself as an expert on parenting and suggesting that parents do this. This is a really damaging thing to do to a child, and this is why a lot of people end up in therapy as adults. One of the many reasons. But from a parenting perspective, a child emotionally regulating and a child numbing and suppressing their emotions can look very similar, can look kind of calm on the surface. So it makes sense that, again, I don't agree with it, but that he's come to the conclusion that, oh, I'm teaching my child to regulate himself. How could one speak to a 2-year-old who's experiencing the feeling of anger and not have them end up with anger in their shadow in adulthood and having to do the shadow work to integrate that anger?
So this approach comes from the clinical psychologist named Daniel Siegel, who has written multiple titles about the development of the brain. His pioneering approach really focuses on the cognitive function of the brain as a way to help children regulate their emotions.
Tantrums are a normal part of development. It's not about you, it's about your child learning to navigate their big feelings with your help. When you say steady, when you create a safe space for your child to write out their emotions, your calm presence tells them, it's okay to feel this way, and I'm here to help you through it.
So you've taken a deep breath, you've calmed yourself down, you've dropped down to your child's eye level. Now you're ready to move on to the next step of the process, which is to validate your child's emotions and experiences. And you're going to do this verbally by reflecting what you see and hear them telling you. So here are a few examples for you. Let's say that your toddler is having a tantrum because it's time to begin the bedtime routine and they don't want to stop playing. You could say something like, I see that you're having so much fun playing with your trains right now. It's really hard to stop playing. You're so mad that you have to stop and take a bath. It's okay to feel mad.
Is this what's upsetting you? The cars inside the bar? That what's upsetting you?
And then by accepting their emotions, telling them it's okay to feel that way, you're giving them permission to own their feelings. You're letting them know that all feelings are okay in your family, even if they're not necessarily the nice feelings. All feelings are just feelings, and it's okay to have them. And that's kind of like the motto for positive discipline anyway, is that all emotions are acceptable, but not all behavior is.
Nurturing comfort is key during a tantrum because every child processes big emotions differently. Some crave physical reassurance, while others need some space or time to decompress. Pay attention to what your child needs at the moment. Observe their cues to determine whether they're seeking closeness or prefer to self-regulate. This helps you provide the support they truly need without overwhelming them. However, when your child is younger, they may not know what they need, so you can learn what your child needs by doing the following. Offering comfort with a choice, like putting your arms out and saying, "If you need a hug, I'm here." Or you can have some space. I'll be here waiting. If they're targeting you specifically, example, pinching or hitting, it's okay to remove yourself temporarily and say, "I'm going to step away because it's not okay to hurt me. I'll stay close by and help you when you're ready." This sets a boundary while staying emotionally available. It's crucial to let your child know that all feelings are okay. Anger, frustration, sadness, but not all behaviors are. You might say, "It's okay to feel upset, but it's not okay to hit or throw things. Let's find a safe way to let out those big feelings." This helps them understand the difference between expressing emotions and managing actions.
And that is where the next step comes in. That is to kindly and firmly set your limit. They have to know that you are going to follow through on the things that you're telling them, that you are their strong, confident, but loving leader. So when you tell your child that it's time to take a bath, or it's time to leave the park, or they have to wait for 15 minutes until dinner time and they're not allowed to have a snack, they have to know that no matter how much whining and crying and arm flailing they engage in, that you are going to hold firm on that boundary. They may not like it in the moment, and they may very loudly express their discontent with you on that point, but at the end of the day, toddlers thrive on feeling safe and secure, and that is the way that you're going to provide that for them. So what that might actually sound like would be, for the bath time tantrum, it's okay to feel sad or frustrated or whatever word you use, and it's time for bath now. Or in the park example, and it's time for us to leave now.
So I hope you're beginning to get an idea of how things end up in our shadows. The second two examples are examples from my own life, and they're examples that on the surface would look like positive attributes. So the reason I'm sharing them is A, because they're from my own life, and the other piece is also making it really clear that things that might appear positive can also be in our shadows and why that happens. So the first one is self-regulation. Obviously my example there with the toddler got sent to the staircase. I don't know the outcome of that, but my assumption is there was some numbing and repression happening because Jordan Peterson said then the toddler comes back and is calm and can rejoin the family unit. Another outcome of that is less common but still relatively common, and something that I suspect happened in my own life, although my parents aren't alive anymore to corroborate this. It comes up very often in anxious attachment patterning as anxious attachment patterning develops, which starts similarly. So there's a toddler, an infant, a child experiencing an emotion. The emotion's really big, they're expressing it loudly. The parents and caregivers don't enjoy that expression, so they send them time out. For an infant, this might be the let them cry it out thing. They leave them in the cot, let them cry and cry and cry. Or for slightly older kids, they get sent to time out. However, instead of going the numbing route, sometimes what the infant or child learns instead, and another strategy that can sometimes work, is if they amplify that emotion. So let them cry it out, the infant's crying and crying, the parents are ignoring them, let them cry it out. If the infant then escalates the distress and cries more and more and louder, if the parents then get to a point where they go, "Oh God, okay, I'm gonna go check on my child, it sounds like they're actually really in pain or having a hard time," and then reconnects with them, the child, the infant in this case, can start learning, "Oh, I only get attended to, I only get love and connection if my emotions are really, really big. If I'm really loud and excited, or I'm really angry at expressing myself, or I'm crying a lot, the parents will only come into connection with me if the emotion and the way I'm expressing it is so big that they think I actually need their support." My parents were quite hands-off in their rearing of me, especially my dad, and he would let me, wander quite far and have a lot of, I think, what he thought was freedom, my experience was like not much connection or attunement. So I'm growing up learning that if I have a regular expression of emotions that actually matches the emotions that I'm having, my parents aren't interacting with me, my parents aren't engaging with me, my peers aren't engaging with me. If my experience of my emotions or the way I express them is really, really big, then I get the attention from my caregivers. And a lot of people say, oh, they're just doing it for attention. Regardless of what age someone is, people need attention, especially very, very young humans, but everyone needs attention. Sometimes, what is attention? It's connection with another person, right? It's being seen. I really appreciated it. I was at a conference recently and it was geared mostly towards teachers, and they rephrased this, and I'm so glad that it's getting into the school system. They said, how do we reframe attention seeking? Attention seeking is connection seeking. And I thought, oh, thank goodness, because that's what it is. And if someone is attention seeking, they're seeking connection. And if you give them connection at the appropriate level, at the appropriate time, it will help their development as a human being. For whatever reason, I was not getting attention or connection at the correct quantity at the correct time. Instead of numbing and repressing, which is one thing that a lot of people do in that situation, a lot of infants and toddlers and young children, I learned that if I amplified my feelings really, really loud, really, really big, then I got attention and connection, which I interpreted as love and safety, right? Because that's what children need, is actual like physical contact even with adults around them, being in the adult's presence, being seen, being engaged with. Throughout repeated experiences of this, both in my family home and then again at school for other problematic reasons, I would say that what ended up in my shadow was the something around self-regulation, but also like the ability to temper my emotional expression to the appropriate degree of the emotional experience, if that makes sense. So I end up in adulthood, and some core part of me believes that if I'm having an emotion and someone else needs to engage with that emotion or needs to see it, it needs to be really, really big, or they're not going to care or engage with me, which ends up in a situation where I seem to be like quite activatable because I don't have that sort of moderate, medium range of emotional expression. I haven't developed it because I learned that if I have a medium amount of expression, I don't get my needs met. But if I crank that, and it's not on purpose, right? It's the same way that the numbing and suppression becomes, it's not intentional. It becomes a habit. It becomes the quickest neural pathway. The system does it without thinking. And that's the whole point, is this ends up as our subconscious. So my subconscious, instead of numbing, cranks the emotional dial way up and the expression comes out very, very big. That becomes problematic because I don't have that gradual, which is, I think, what we're working towards in adulthood, is not numbing them. Numbing, not helpful, because that cuts us off from what's important to us and how to be in connection with others. But also the alternative maladaptive behavior, which is in this case anxious attachment, is cranking that emotional experiencing up super, super high. Yeah, so the thing that was in my shadow that I didn't know was there and I eventually had to integrate was the ability to express my emotions at the appropriate level to which I was truly experiencing or feeling them. Because that crank up, like there's a degree there in which that extra emotional energy was, it was a trauma response essentially, right? Little t trauma response to things, historical happenings, and not a real-time response to what was happening in my environment. So both of these shadow examples, the numbing and suppression and the cranking up of emotions, are both not actually real-time, appropriate level emotional responses to what's happening in our environment, right? Because the numbing could look like someone like really seriously crosses your boundaries and does something like that would like really hurt you were you connected to your emotions, and you go, oh, you know, that's fine, I don't care. That's not great, because then that person might continue to do that thing because they haven't received from you that that's harmful behavior, or that behavior you receive with hurt. If you're cut off from that hurt's still going to exist. You're going to be cut off from it, it's going to build up, and can become problematic in a number of ways in the future. But also, if someone does something and I crank that emotion up, not intentionally, right? The whole thing about when things are still in our shadows, we're not aware of them, then someone does something that's like, I feel hurt by it, but if the appropriate level of emotional response was, hey, you did this thing, I feel hurt, I'd like you to not do that again, I'm actually quite upset about it. Compared to, I crank the energy up and I'm just like, this person is the worst person ever, I'm never going to be your friend again, I can't believe you did that, I hate you, I'm storming off, I'm not going to talk to you for 5 weeks. I'd get really stuck in these feelings and these emotional experiences for like weeks or months at a time, and they'd be really, really sticky. The third piece is exuberance. Specifically exuberance I want to kind of pull apart from that emotional regulation level that I was describing, because I think exuberance specifically was also put into my shadow. It wasn't the same thing. So I was quite a happy kid for a while, really enjoyed a lot of things in the world, really like curious and engaged. And I remember when I started school, I was like 5, learning about dinosaurs and like reading books and, engaging with people. And I was like very loud and expressive. And the teacher would often, if I was loud and expressive, I was having a great time, making jokes in the class, would send me to timeout, send me to the corridor. I didn't understand why this was happening. It was either not explained to me or was not explained in a way that my 5-year-old brain could comprehend. So my emotional experience and what I learned is if I am joyful and expressing my joy, that gets me sent to timeout. There must be something bad or wrong about being exuberant. So exuberance ends up in my shadow. The clip from Jordan Peterson, he talks about adults not experiencing that level of joy.
You know how erratic 2-year-olds are. I mean, they're a blast, and it's part because they're erratic. It's like they're unbelievably happy, and then they're unbelievably hungry, and then they're really hot, and then they're really upset and crying, and then they're really scared. It's like, and all of that's just untrammeled, and so it's really fun to be around them, especially when they're happy, because they're so happy that it's just, you don't ever get to be that happy. And so it's nice to be around a 2-year-old because you can kind of feel that again.
Yeah, of course. If that's the way you teach your child to process or regulate their emotion through numbing what you think looks under control, then you're going to produce adults who numb themselves. And then of course we can't feel as much joy as a 2-year-old because we've been conditioned that way. So exuberance specifically is something that I'm trying to incorporate, because even after I incorporated the appropriate emotional experience, like the level of it and the expression of it, I think there was still a piece of me, in addition to that, that would not express joy, exuberance, to the level of the degree that I wanted to, because that specifically felt unsafe to me. Because I want to be able to express my joy and engage with my joy in the world, right? If I'm like really happy and having a great time, I want to dance, I want to move, I want to smile, I want to laugh. And even just saying that right now on camera, even though I've done all this shadow work, there's still a part of me that goes, oh no, oh that's scary, that's dangerous, that'll get us disconnected from our loved ones. That'll get me disconnected from the safety that I need to move through the world and be in connection with community. So that piece is still there, and I'm still working on exuberance, but we're getting very close. I just want to jump in here and speak to a piece that might be coming up as an apparent contradiction. When I talked about anger, I used that Brené Brown quote and said that one cannot selectively numb emotion. But now it seems like I might be saying that I was selectively numbing exuberance and still experiencing my other emotions. I had to do some journaling on this to get really clear on why the selective numbing wasn't relevant to the exuberance piece. And what it is that with the anger example, there's this disidentification from anger completely, right? I cannot feel angry ever. It's not safe. It'll get me disconnected from my loved ones. I'm not an angry person. I don't feel angry. With the exuberance, I think what was happening, maybe because I was a bit older when that shadow came around and it was in a school context specifically with the exuberance, there was a piece of going, oh, I'm not safe in this moment, in this context to express it. So part of my psyche is going to pause that exuberance, keep it over here for a while and find acceptable space to express it, which ended up for me being once a year at a festival. I'd then take all my exuberance or all my joy from throughout the year and express it all at once and try and cram it into like a 4 or 5, 6 day week of partying. So it was still coming out, and there wasn't a disidentification from it. I wasn't saying I'm not a joyful person, I never express exuberance, but there was this fear and this stuckness going, oh, this is not the appropriate moment, I can't do it here, not now, right? Not in public, not around these people, not in this context, not with this person, not even by myself, I think. Like, oh, I'm alone, am I going to express exuberance? No, I'm not a person who does that. There was some stuckness, so it was kind of being on hold, on pause for a bit, but then it was coming through eventually. So I think that was the distinction there. Like, I wasn't numbing the feeling of joy, and I wasn't numbing the expression of exuberance, I was pausing it. It's a subtle distinction, and I'm open to exploring and revisiting that in the future. Cool, so thank you for going on this journey of 3 things that could be in your shadow and why they ended up there. I hope there's some clarity on what the shadow is, why things end up in our shadow. And I named a little bit about how those things can play out in adulthood. Scott Jeffrey says, by age 18, we have cut off and divorced ourselves from many aspects of our personality, including our repressed emotions. Getting to know these disowned parts is essential for healing our psyches, releasing stored emotions, and moving toward mature adulthood. Shadow work seeks to bring these disowned parts into the light so they won't influence our behavior. One of the important bits there that Scott points out is that before we've recognized what's in our shadow and done the integration, what is in the shadow is still affecting our lives in quite a big way, but it's done in a way that we are not conscious of. So we might blame other people for it, or we might have shame around it and hide it from ourselves. We might just decide that, oh, we're not that type of person, or we're not able to navigate this particular environment or these particular social situations. And there might just be something in our shadow that we haven't integrated. Once we can identify that and integrate it, it gives us more choice. We might then choose not to be in relation with that person or to navigate those environments, but we have the choice to do so. So shadow work is essentially, the goal is integrating these things back into our lives in a way that we can experience them in an appropriate manner. And when I say appropriate, I don't mean culturally approved. I mean in a way that is healthy and wholesome for ourselves, which sometimes is culturally approved, but sometimes not. Like the expression of exuberance, I saw a video on Instagram of this guy dancing in the street. He's got his headphones on, he's not in anyone's way, it's like a big kind of concrete park area. He's having a great time. Someone calls the cops on him. The cops show up, asking this guy if he's doing okay, what drugs he's on, how, like, really grilling him about his life. And he's like, no, I'm sober, I'm in a public space, I'm dancing, I'm not bothering anyone, I'm just really having a beautiful day in the sunshine. I'm like, real good right now. And the cops just keep questioning him and grilling him. That's the thing that I'd say, the expression of exuberance, totally appropriate for ourselves and our connection with ourselves, not culturally sanctioned. But that's not the point, you know. There are a lot of problems in culture, and I think if something's culturally sanctioned, that's not a good metric for if we are healthy within ourselves and our emotional and mental well-being. Many people can have resistance at the idea of looking into themselves, looking into their shadow. I'm still not quite sure why this is. I wonder if it's fear of change or fear of having to process the really big stuff. My approach coming into this work, and as I continue to do this work, is the idea that nothing within me can be bigger than myself. Right? That seems pretty straightforward, pretty obvious. There is nothing within me that I cannot contain, and therefore there's nothing within me that I cannot process. Andrea Gibson has a beautiful quote on this. They said, "My wounds will never ever be bigger than I am." Regardless of why people are afraid of looking into their shadow, if it's fear of themselves, fear of having to process the big emotions, fear that the emotions might overwhelm them, I'd really encourage curiosity, gentleness, compassion, and bravery as well. There's nothing in here, at least for adults, there's nothing in here that we cannot process. There's nothing in here that you cannot hold. And if you need someone else to help you hold it, you'll find someone else to help you hold it. One of the reasons that things get stuck is because as children things can be too overwhelming, and it's because we're just little. We don't have the cognitive processes yet. Yeah. one thing I had to remind myself as I did this work was, talking to my inner child, hey, I'm an adult now. I can handle this. We got this. So shadow work is the integration of these things. The hardest step is to figure out what is in our shadow. There's a staircase, I'll chuck it up on the screen because I find it very helpful, which begins with unconscious incompetence. So if we look at any kind of learning, I think this is a great way to conceptualize learning. We don't know what we don't know. We don't know what we're not doing. Getting from that level to conscious incompetence, that's the most difficult step, where we have to begin to understand what we don't know and what we haven't integrated and be able to point to those pieces and name them. One thing that'll be able to support anyone doing shadow work and anyone doing any healing work is getting connected to the body. Really getting in touch with that mind-body connection. I found for me attachment theory to be super, super helpful about this. So if there are ways that you are showing up in relationships, not necessarily just romantic, but these can often be the ones that this shows up the most obvious or intense, because these are often the most intense emotional entanglements we have, emotional connections, but it can be in friendships or with family. If there are patterns that are coming up that you're finding that are harmful or hurtful in your life, it's not about self-blame and saying, I must be responsible for these, but there is an invitation to start asking, am I contributing to this pattern? And if so, how? I only was able to start doing my shadow work when I had my third big breakup of my adult life. I wasn't able to name a pattern before that because there hadn't been one to look at. There'd only been one data point and then 2 data points, which is not enough to say, oh, this is something that keeps happening. By the third data point, I went, hold on, there's something here that's not working. I wonder how I'm contributing to it. And I can point to the ways that these other people had done things that had caused me to feel hurt, but I became aware of that the way I responded was not productive to us staying in relationship. So learning about attachment theory for me was really helpful. I highly recommend Heidi Priebe's work on this. I find her work on attachment theory to be the kindest and most honest work on attachment theory. And when I say kind, I don't mean letting things slide. Quite the opposite. She really advocates self-responsibility and self-awareness, but in a way that is just filled with compassion and honesty and hope as well. I'm not saying that if you have something in your shadow that you have an insecure attachment style. That's not necessarily the case. But if you have an insecure attachment style, you definitely have something in your shadow. And the point of attachment work is to recognize the attachment style that we're showing up with so we can then work to integrate the parts of ourselves that we disowned on our journey growing up because they didn't work for us, and work towards secure attachment. However, there are other things that could end up in our shadow, and we may be showing up relatively securely attached in relationships in our lives and still have things that we've disowned. So they might not be things that are necessarily affecting our relationships, but they could be affecting other parts of our lives. Another way to explore doing shadow work is through parts work. So this could be talking to your inner child or doing internal family systems work. A really good way to approach this would be to find a therapist that specializes in IFS, internal family systems. The other approach can be just Googling shadow journal prompts. The reason I focus so much on things that could be considered positive traits being in our shadow is because a lot of the shadow journal prompts and a lot of the shadow journal websites focus on things that are considered dark or like negative emotions. So again, anger, rage, jealousy, envy, and a lot of these can be in our shadows. And my approach to mental health, emotional well-being is that feelings are never bad or wrong. Even shame can be really, really hurtful. And I hope that a lot of people can work towards a place where they don't experience shame anymore, because I don't see shame as ever having a productive, immediate effect on us. But the working with the shame can help free up a lot of parts of ourselves that we're disidentified with. So if you ever have the emotional feeling of shame, there's quite possibly something there in your shadow that you haven't connected with, because shame says there's something bad and wrong with me. And that often means there's something in your shadow that you've pushed away that you've decided is the bad or wrong thing. So an approach to shadow work is figuring out if there is something in your shadow, what it is. And then once you've figured that out, what's in your shadow, it can be quite straightforward. I don't say easy. There will be effort required, but the path can be much clearer around how to work with that. Once you know what the thing is in your shadow, there can be a wealth of information. Also, a lot of inner critic narratives can point to stuff in your shadow. So if you have a voice in your head that says, I don't deserve to be happy, or I'm a burden, or I'm too much, or I'm not enough, or I'm lazy, all of those inner critic narratives are very likely to be pointing to something in your shadow. I think it's that piece of self-awareness, really looking at yourself, being really, really honest, and I mean like truly honest with yourself around what have I disidentified with, what have I pushed away, what has my subconscious in my youth decided was unacceptable for me to experience. What is that? Once you can name it, that's incredibly powerful. And if you can understand how it got there, even better. You don't necessarily have to. There can be things in your shadow that you might never understand why they ended up there. That's okay. Once you can name the thing that's in your shadow, and there are often multiple things in our shadows, once you can name them, then I think you can integrate them. For me, it was like, what is self-regulation, you know? So I did the attachment theory work. I just remember sitting there Googling, like, what is self-regulation? How do I feel an emotion by myself and process it without another person there, like having to witness that experience? Co-regulation is not bad. It's really important for us to have co-regulation skills as well. But adults should also be able to self-regulate as well. And there's a number of reasons why one might choose self-regulation over co-regulation or choose co-regulation over self-regulation. But if we only do one of those, there is likely something in our shadow that we haven't addressed. So that's another approach perhaps. Like if you're a person who always goes away and processes your emotions by yourself and never, ever, ever shares your feelings with anyone else, there's probably something in your shadow there to look at. Probably a narrative there, like people who share feelings with others are burdens or something. There might be a concept there. And if there's a concept, like a core worldview, that on the face of it, looking at it, you might go, oh, that's actually like a bit kind of black and white or quite judgmental. There's probably something in your shadow there. And in my personal experience, I was the person who always went to other people to co-regulate all the time. And then I had a narrative like, I'm a burden, which was coming out of me seeing myself relying on people 100% for all my emotional regulation when that wasn't necessarily the appropriate approach in all situations. And so I'm developing the skill now, this discernment of if I'm having an emotional experience and a feeling, when is it appropriate to go to someone else and when is it appropriate to self-regulate? And also, who do I go to with this feeling? Because I would pretty much always go to the person who the feeling was about. And now I am learning that that is sometimes appropriate, especially if someone's done something, I'm in connection with them and I feel angry. It's really mature for me to go to the person who's done the thing and tell them, hey, you did this thing, I feel angry. Rather than going to someone else and be like, that person did a thing and I feel angry about it. Cool, but that person doesn't know, so how are they meant to change their behavior now, right? Or if I just go away and like scream into the void and come back, again, the person who I'm angry at doesn't know that I've experienced hurt by a thing they've done. But then there's also some expressions that self-regulation or co-regulation with another person are appropriate. I understand that I spent a lot of time talking about how things ended up in our shadows, what kind of things could be in our shadows, and the goal of shadow work, which is that final integration piece of bringing that thing out of our shadow and into our own lives in a way that brings more wholeness into our lives. Just using that anger example again, right? It's not then expressing our anger and rage all the time, everywhere, to anyone when we're upset. It's still learning how to express that in healthy, productive ways, pro-social ways, ways that can support us taking care of ourselves, setting our own boundaries, but also continuing to be in relationship with people. I think anger is a super interesting one because I think the appropriate expression of anger is actually a really good tool in conflict resolution, which sounds counterintuitive. So it's not just bringing the thing, you know, like envy, jealousy, and just go, I'm going to feel that all the time without any thought for how that is like affecting other people. No, it's about integrating it. And what does integration mean? Integration means I'm still using my logic mind in my adult life now to understand how to appropriately weave it into my life. And often at the very beginning, it's quite clunky, right? Because we're learning a new thing. And, there were moments, I'm about to turn 35 now, and it's only the last 5 years that I've learned a lot of this stuff, and especially early on, I'd feel embarrassed sometimes, like, oh man, I'm 31, 32, and I don't know how to self-regulate. Like, oh, I'm looking at people around me and like a lot of them seem to be self-regulating. I definitely know some of them are numbing, but a lot of them also seem to be self-regulating, and I feel a bit embarrassed about not having learned that. But I just have to accept I wasn't taught these things. I understand that I've shared the goal, which is the integration, and I maybe have not touched on how to do the shadow work itself. I think partly because that's so broad, there's a lot of different ways to approach it. Partly because I think once you understand why that thing ended up in your shadow and what it is, the next step is easier. Once you can name the thing, you can look at the thing, you can understand the thing, then you can do your own research, you can Google, you can talk to a therapist, talk to another mental health practitioner who's written a book on this subject, listen to a podcast about it, talk to your friends. I went to a friend and I said, hey, I feel like I want to feel joy, but I can't. And I want to express joy, but it's stuck. And we talked about it a little bit. And the friend finally said, it's not joy, Bodhi, it's exuberance. And I went, oh my God, yes, that word. And they said, yeah, it's not that you're not feeling joy. There's a blocker of the expression of it. Like something in your system is going, what? Can't express that. And once I realized that was what it was pretty straightforward to integrate it. Because then I could say, okay, well, I'm blocking my expression of joy. How would I like to express my joy? What does exuberance look like? And not in a way that the default culture deems approvable, because it doesn't oftentimes. Where can I express my joy? I go to festivals a lot because I can dance on the dance floor and jump around and wave my hands and be in nature and in music and with humans at the same time and really get into my body and express that exuberance and laugh and cackle and howl and whatever it is and express myself. And I'm being optimistic when I'm not deep diving into that piece as much, because I think once you know what it is in your shadow, knowing how it got there can be very helpful, but it's not necessary. Once you know what's in your shadow, you can start looking at what integration would look like. What would it look like to be integrated with this thing? And then once you've got your bit here where you are and your bit here where you want to get, the path can become quite clear, and there are so many ways to do that. And I really feel optimistic about you all figuring out that journey for yourselves. And I've talked a bit about how I got there as well. Thank you for watching this video on emotional shadow work. I hope you learned something. I'm using these videos on my channel as a space to explore mental and emotional health and well-being. A lot of things I talk about here are things that I've done or am actively engaged with or doing. I have come to a place in my life where I feel much more grounded, much more in touch with myself, and I do believe that I am affecting other people in the world around me in a much more positive and wholesome way. And I don't mean to present myself as an expert on all the topics I talk about here. I'm definitely open to having conversations with people about these subjects. These are subjects that I want to share about because I found that they've helped me immensely in my healing journey. Things that work for me might not work for you, and vice versa, and that's okay. I do hope that this video sparked something in you and supported you into greater self-awareness. And if you looked inside yourself and decided, okay, no, it doesn't seem like there's anything in my shadow, but there's still something I need to work on, that's okay. Not all mental health work is shadow work, not all healing is shadow work, and not all healing journeys involve shadow work. So that's all good. I just found that mine did, and it helped me a lot in my process to become a more wholesome, and I mean that in both the meanings of the term, integrated, whole human being. Thanks again for watching. See you next time.